The auction house was buzzing with excitement as bidders, each with their own interests and desires, shouted out their offers. But for one horse, this day was not going to be a triumph. The sleek, muscular steed strutted proudly before the crowd, their hooves stamping and heads held high. The onlookers were captivated by their strength, their beauty. These were the horses everyone wanted. But not him. The weak-looking gelding stood at the far end of the auction ring, his coat matted and dirty from weeks of neglect. His ribs were clearly visible, and his once promising mane was now a tangled mess of straw-like hair. His eyes, however, were full of quiet determination, but no one seemed to notice. He was smaller than most of the horses present, his frame fragile compared to the others. His legs shook under the weight of his own body, and every step seemed like a struggle. The crowd paid him little attention, more interested in the strong, fast horses that had the potential to win races and bring in a profit. No one saw his hidden potential. No one except one girl. Layla Thompson sat quietly at the back of the auction house, her hands folded in her lap. She had been attending horse auctions for years, but today was different. Today, she wasn't here to buy a champion. She was here to find someone no one else wanted. Her heart ached for the weaker, more overlooked horses, the ones who never stood a chance in the race for the highest bid. And when she saw the gelding being led into the ring, she felt a strange pull in her chest. "He's too weak," her father whispered beside her, as they watched the auctioneer call out, "Starting bid for lot 27, $500. Layla's heart sank. The horse's chances of finding a new home, let alone a loving one, seemed impossible. Yet, there was something about him that tugged at her heart. Something in the way he stood, weak, yes, but not broken. As the bidding continued, Layla's eyes never left him. Her thoughts raced. She had always loved horses, but her family was known for buying high-quality animals that could bring in good returns. She knew that if she went for the weak horse, her father would be furious. But she couldn't ignore the instinct that told her he needed her. This was the chance for something real. She had nothing to lose. Without thinking, she stood up and raised her hand. The auctioneer hesitated for a moment. "We have a bid. $500, he called out. "Do I hear $600? The other bidders turned away, their eyes focused on the prize horses, animals with the pedigree, the strength, the speed. They had no interest in a weak, sickly animal like the gelding. And so, the bidding fell silent. Layla raised her hand again, and the auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Sold," he announced. Layla couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had bought the horse. Her heart raced with excitement, and her father looked at her with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. He knew that this was a decision she might soon regret. The horse was led away to a small pen, separated from the other animals, looking confused and frightened. Layla approached him cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. His eyes flickered to her, and for the first time, he seemed to trust her. She could see the doubt and fear in his face, but there was something else too, a quiet hope, a glimmer of belief that perhaps he wasn't as lost as everyone thought. "Hey there," Layla whispered gently, extending her hand to the horse. He stepped back slightly, unsure, but didn't run away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small apple. Slowly, she held it out to him, her eyes calm and reassuring. After a long moment, the horse took a cautious step forward and sniffed the fruit. Tentatively, he nibbled at the apple, and Layla smiled. "You'll be okay," she murmured softly. "I'll take care of you. I promise." The journey back to Layla's family farm was long and quiet. The gelding was loaded into a trailer, looking weary but at least a little calmer now. Layla's father drove in silence, still in disbelief over her decision. He didn't understand why she chose this horse. He didn't see the potential, the fire that burned quietly beneath the horse's tired eyes. Layla's mind was already racing. She had a plan, a vision in her head. This wasn't just about rescuing a horse from being rejected. She could feel it in her bones. This horse had something special, something others couldn't see. He wasn't just going to be her companion. He was going to be a champion. As the farm came into view, Layla's excitement grew. She knew she had her work cut out for her. The gelding's muscles were weak, his spirit fragile, but she had time. She had patience. And with every bit of effort she was willing to put in, he would get stronger. She would make him believe that he was more than just a reject at an auction. Layla parked the truck next to the barn and opened the trailer door. The horse stepped out slowly, his legs trembling as he tried to stand upright. He looked at her uncertainly, as if wondering what would happen next. Layla led him into the barn, where she had already prepared a cozy stall for him. "You'll be comfortable here," she reassured him, brushing a hand across his coarse coat. It was going to take time. Layla knew that. She could see that the horse was weak and malnourished, but she could also see the strength in him, the spark that no one else had recognized. This wasn't just about physical training. This was about trust. And she was going to earn it. Layla spent the next few days feeding him small meals, giving him plenty of water, and speaking to him gently. She named him Echo, because she believed he would one day rise above his past and echo the voices of those who had given up on him. Every day, she worked with him, building up his strength and his confidence. She led him around the paddock, letting him stretch his legs and explore the new environment. Slowly but surely, Echo began to trust her. He stopped flinching at her touch, stopped fearing the world around him. Layla's father, though skeptical, watched from a distance. He couldn't understand why his daughter was so determined. He didn't know what it was about this horse that captured her heart. But day by day, he began to see the bond between them grow. It was undeniable. As the weeks went by, Echo's condition improved. His coat began to shine again, his muscles regained their tone, and his strength was slowly returning. Layla had a special way of working with him, speaking to him as if they were equals. Echo seemed to respond to her voice, his ears perking up when she called his name. He was a fighter, just like her. One evening, as Layla walked him through the paddock, she saw something in Echo's eyes that hadn't been there before, a glimmer of hope, a silent promise that he was ready. He was ready to show the world who he truly was. "Let's make you a champion, Echo," she whispered, as the stars above them began to twinkle in the night sky. The journey was just beginning, but Layla knew that with every step, Echo was becoming the horse she always believed he could be. She wasn't just going to make him a champion. She was going to prove that sometimes the weakest among us are the strongest of all. Months passed, and Echo's transformation continued, but it wasn't an easy path. There were days when the weight of the challenge seemed too heavy, when it felt like the horse wasn't improving fast enough, or that the world outside the barn still saw him as weak, as nothing more than a rejected animal. But not Layla. She never lost faith in him. Each morning, she began her routine early, greeting Echo with a soft touch and a smile. The barn was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of hooves on the floor and the occasional soft whinny from the other horses. Layla made sure to feed him the best grains, giving him the nutrition he had lacked for so long. But it wasn't just the food that was healing him, it was the patience, the trust, the daily connection between them. Every moment together was spent building more than just muscle. They were building a bond. Echo's progress was steady but slow. At first, he couldn't even trot without stumbling, his legs still weak from months of malnutrition and neglect. Layla would spend hours walking beside him, coaxing him forward with soft words of encouragement. But, in his own quiet way, Echo started to respond. His legs were less shaky, and he seemed to stand taller, more proud. He wasn't the same fragile creature from the auction house anymore. Layla took him to the paddock every day to let him run. The first time she had opened the gate to let him loose, Echo had hesitated, his eyes filled with doubt. But once he realized that there was nothing to stop him, that he could move as fast as he could handle, a fire seemed to ignite in his eyes. He began to run, not with speed or grace, but with a determination that made Layla's heart swell with pride. He wasn't just running, he was fighting. It wasn't long before Layla started noticing small improvements. Echo no longer flinched when she touched him. In fact, he would nuzzle into her hand with affection. She knew then that he was ready for the next step. It was time to introduce him to something bigger, something more challenging than the quiet farm life he had been used to. It was time for training. Layla's father had watched their progress from the sidelines, and though he still doubted Echo's potential, even he had to admit that the gelding was stronger now. One afternoon, Layla decided to push Echo just a little further. She wanted to see if he had the stamina for more than just running around the paddock. She set up a small obstacle course, nothing too complicated, but enough to test Echo's agility. The first few attempts were a mess. Echo tried to jump over the hurdles but stumbled halfway, his legs unable to carry him fast enough. Layla didn't get frustrated. She wasn't expecting perfection. She walked beside him, gently guiding him back to the starting point each time. "You'll get it, Echo," she reassured him, her voice firm but kind. "One step at a time." It wasn't until the 5th attempt that something shifted. Echo made it over the first hurdle, then the second, and when he approached the last one, his body seemed to tense with focus. Layla's heart raced. The moment he cleared that last jump, she couldn't help but let out a cheer. Echo had done it. He wasn't just recovering, he was starting to excel. Over the next few weeks, they spent hours refining his skills, working together to improve his form, his speed, and his confidence. Layla worked with him every day, patiently guiding him through jumps and obstacles, encouraging him when he faltered. There were moments when Echo would stop, exhausted or uncertain, but each time, Layla was there, reminding him that he was strong and capable. With every small success, Echo's confidence grew. Layla's father, while still unsure of Echo's future, couldn't deny that the horse had come a long way. He was no longer the fragile, weak animal that had been left to rot at the auction house. He was becoming something different, a horse that, with enough effort and care, could one day be something remarkable. One evening, as Layla and Echo practiced in the paddock, her father approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Layla," he began, "I know I wasn't on board with this whole thing at first. But you've really turned this horse around. I'm not sure where this journey is headed, but if anyone can make him something great, it's you." Layla's eyes shone with gratitude, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down. The hard part wasn't over yet. She knew that Echo's recovery had only scratched the surface of what he was capable of. To make him a champion, she would need more than just patience and compassion. She would need strategy, skill, and grit. And that meant finding the right place for him to truly test himself, the racetrack. Layla had spent months training Echo, but she knew that putting him in front of experienced trainers and competition would push him further than she could ever do alone. There was a prestigious race coming up, one that was known for drawing attention from top breeders, trainers, and competitors across the country. It was the perfect opportunity for Echo to prove to everyone, including herself, that he wasn't just a weak horse, he was a fighter. She entered him into the race, much to her father's surprise. He didn't believe Echo could compete at that level, not after everything the horse had been through. But Layla believed. She believed in him more than anyone else. She had seen his strength, his heart, his will to succeed. It was time for Echo to show the world what he was made of. The morning of the race, the air was thick with anticipation. The grandstands were filled with spectators, the excitement palpable as the horses lined up for the event. Layla stood in the stable area, quietly brushing Echo's coat, her fingers trembling slightly with nerves. She could feel the tension in her chest. This wasn't just a race. This was their moment, the culmination of everything they had worked for. Echo seemed calm, his breathing steady as he nuzzled her shoulder. Layla leaned in close, her voice a soft whisper. "We've come a long way, Echo. I know you can do this." The race began, and Echo took his place among the other horses. From the start, it was clear he was at a disadvantage. The other competitors were faster, more experienced, and their horses were built for speed. But Layla had seen something in Echo that no one else had, the ability to persevere. As the race progressed, Echo fought through the exhaustion. He fell behind at first, but Layla's voice carried him forward, urging him with every stride. She could feel the tension building, the pressure mounting, but her faith never wavered. This was his chance, and he was going to take it. Just as they neared the final stretch, something incredible happened. Echo surged forward, his legs moving faster than ever before. The other horses struggled to keep up as Echo pushed through the pain, his determination outweighing everything else. With a final burst of strength, Echo crossed the finish line, first. The crowd erupted into applause, but Layla could barely believe what had just happened. The weak horse who had been rejected, the one no one thought would ever amount to anything, had become a champion. Echo had done it. And so had she. Echo stood proudly in the winner's circle, his coat shining in the afternoon sun. The crowd's cheers echoed through the air, and Layla could hardly contain the wave of emotion that crashed over her. He had done it. Against all odds, Echo had proven himself on the track. But as the excitement began to die down, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. The race was only the beginning. Now, Echo was truly a contender, a horse that would be expected to maintain that level of performance. Layla knew this wouldn't be easy. The road to true greatness was paved with even more difficulties, but she was ready for whatever came next. However, the very next morning, the reality of what lay ahead became clear. Layla's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter as she prepared a light breakfast for herself and Echo. It was a message from an old trainer, Derek Thompson, someone her father had recommended. Derek had been the trainer for some of the country's most successful racehorses, and his reputation was impeccable. But he was also known for being tough, relentless in his pursuit of perfection. Layla stared at the text, which was brief but unsettling. "I saw Echo's race yesterday. Impressive, but not enough. If you want him to go to the top, you'll need to get serious about his training. I've got a spot for him at my barn, but he'll have to meet my standards." Layla took a deep breath. She had known that this moment would come. There would be critics, trainers, and experts who would push her and Echo beyond their limits. But she had also learned something from her journey with Echo. This horse was not just a project, he was family. And family didn't quit. She would do whatever it took to help him succeed. Determined, Layla packed Echo up the next day and headed to Derek's barn. The air was thick with anticipation as they pulled up to the massive training facility. Echo's ears pricked up, sensing the intensity that radiated from the horses in the surrounding paddocks. They were all top-tier competitors, sleek, powerful, and fast. Echo, in comparison, was smaller, with a thinner build. But Layla knew the potential that lay beneath his coat. Derek, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, met them at the barn. His sharp eyes skimmed over Echo, and a hint of skepticism crossed his face. "So, this is the horse who won the race," he said, his voice cool and analytical. "He's got some fire, but he's nowhere near ready for the top-tier races. This won't be an easy road." Layla straightened her back. She'd heard the doubts before, but she wasn't backing down. "I know it won't be easy, but I've seen what he's capable of, and I believe in him. I want you to train him." Derek raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Fine. But you need to understand something. If he's going to make it, it's not just about talent. It's about drive, discipline, and grit. I push my horses hard. If you're not prepared for that, then leave now." Layla swallowed her nerves and nodded. "I'm ready." The next few weeks were some of the hardest Echo had ever faced. Under Derek's watchful eye, training became a grueling routine. Echo was pushed harder than ever before, subjected to intense workouts designed to improve his stamina, speed, and focus. The other horses at Derek's barn were strong, experienced, and had a level of confidence that Echo lacked. Every day, Layla could feel the pressure mounting, not just on Echo, but on herself. She knew that Derek's standards were high, but she didn't expect him to be so relentless. There were mornings when Echo seemed to have nothing left to give. His muscles were sore, his legs shaky, and his eyes dull with exhaustion. But Layla didn't give up. She stayed by his side, feeding him, brushing him, speaking to him with gentle encouragement. "You've come this far, Echo," she whispered during one particularly tough training session. "Don't stop now. We're in this together." But Derek wasn't impressed. "If you want him to be a champion, you need to push him harder," he said one afternoon, as Echo stumbled during a high-intensity sprint. "If you're going to baby him, then we're wasting our time." Layla's frustration began to build. She'd already given everything she had for Echo, and now she was being told it wasn't enough. Echo wasn't just another horse to her. He was a companion, a friend. She wasn't going to let Derek break him down. But she couldn't ignore Derek's words. As much as it hurt to hear him speak so coldly, she knew he was right about one thing. Echo couldn't remain weak forever. If they wanted to make it to the top, they had to go further than they ever had before. Layla took a step back and reevaluated her approach. She had to find a way to train Echo harder without losing the bond they had formed. They had to push through the pain together, but still protect the trust that was at the core of their relationship. The next week, Layla decided to take a different approach. She began to integrate the same rigorous training methods that Derek used, but combined them with the compassion and understanding she had always used with Echo. She worked alongside him, running next to him, helping him over obstacles, and rewarding him for every small success. Derek watched from a distance, clearly unimpressed with her soft approach. But as the days passed, something remarkable began to happen. Echo started to improve. Slowly but surely, he was gaining strength. His stamina increased, his confidence grew, and he began to take on the more intense training with an unexpected level of determination. One day, during a grueling sprint session, Echo pushed himself faster than ever before. His hooves pounded the dirt as he tore down the track, his body lean and powerful, his eyes focused. Layla watched in awe as Echo surged forward, not as a weak, uncertain horse but as a force to be reckoned with. She ran beside him, encouraging him every step of the way. Derek, who had been standing on the sidelines with his arms crossed, finally spoke. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like he's got it in him after all." Layla grinned, her heart swelling with pride. He always did. By the end of the training session, Derek was no longer the only one impressed. Echo had exceeded even his expectations, pushing through limits that no one thought possible. He was no longer just a horse with potential. He was a serious contender, ready for the biggest challenge of all. But despite his progress, Layla knew that the hardest race was still ahead. The upcoming championship was the event that would define everything for them: Echo's potential, her training methods, and their shared future. The race was the ultimate test. There would be no turning back. Echo had overcome the doubts, the exhaustion, and the challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. Now, they stood on the precipice of greatness. The only thing left to do was to show the world, once and for all, what they were made of. The day of the championship arrived, and Layla stood at the edge of the racetrack, her heart thudding in her chest. The stands were packed with thousands of spectators, all eager to see who would take home the title of the year. Among the horses that lined up at the starting gate, Echo stood tall and proud, his coat gleaming under the sun. He had come a long way from the rejected horse at the auction, but this was the moment that would truly test everything they had worked for. It was now or never. Layla reached out and stroked Echo's neck, whispering softly, "We've done everything we can, Echo. Trust me, and we'll do this together." Echo's ears flicked back as if understanding, his steady breathing the only sound in the noisy crowd. For the first time in months, there was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. They had trained for this, together. The obstacles they had faced had only made them stronger. And now, there was nothing to hold them back. As the announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeakers, the excitement reached a fever pitch. The horses, sleek and powerful, were getting ready to race, but Layla knew something the others didn't. Echo wasn't just another horse in the lineup. He was a fighter, a survivor. And she would make sure the world saw that today. The starting gate swung open, and the race began. At first, Echo struggled to keep up with the pack. The other horses, faster and more experienced, surged ahead. Layla's pulse quickened, but she refused to let panic take over. Echo had proven time and time again that he could rise to the occasion. They weren't in the lead yet, but it didn't matter. The race wasn't over. Not yet. "Come on, Echo!" Layla shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "You've got this." Echo's hooves pounded the track as they rounded the first curve. His legs, once shaky and weak, were now strong and steady. With every stride, the gap between him and the other horses narrowed. Layla's heart swelled with pride, but she knew the real test was yet to come. As they approached the second turn, one of the leading horses, a massive thoroughbred named Black Shadow, started to pull away, building momentum. The others followed, their jockeys urging them on. Layla could see it in their eyes. These horses were powerful, conditioned for speed, and built for victory. Echo, despite all his progress, was still smaller, still at a disadvantage. The world was watching, and Layla's mind raced. She couldn't let Echo fall behind now. Not after everything they had been through. She clenched the reins, urging him forward. "Focus, Echo. We're in this together. One step at a time." It was then that she saw the first hint of a shift. Echo's body seemed to loosen, his stride lengthening with newfound grace. The other horses were still ahead, but Echo was no longer struggling to keep up. He was finding his rhythm, his pace. He was no longer just trying to survive the race. He was beginning to thrive. The crowd cheered as Echo pushed forward, gaining on the pack. The sound of hooves, pounding in a steady rhythm, filled the air, and Layla's heart raced with excitement. Every inch Echo gained felt like a victory. Every stride he took another step toward proving the world wrong. And then, something unexpected happened. As they approached the final stretch, Black Shadow, who had been leading for most of the race, faltered. He stumbled, his legs giving way slightly as his jockey struggled to regain control. The crowd gasped as Black Shadow veered off course, losing valuable speed. It was a moment of weakness, one that Layla had been waiting for. Now was the time. Layla leaned forward, urging Echo on with everything she had. "This is it, Echo. Push harder. We can do this." Echo responded in a way that shocked even her. His muscles surged with power as he closed the gap between himself and the leader. With every breath, with every stride, Echo was closing in. The final stretch was in sight, and Echo's determination was undeniable. The crowd was on their feet, screaming with excitement. And then, in a breathtaking moment, Echo surged ahead. He wasn't just racing to finish, he was racing to win. Layla could feel the speed building, the wind whipping through her hair as Echo's powerful legs pounded the track. The final few meters stretched on like an eternity, but Echo didn't falter. He was unstoppable. With a burst of energy that seemed to come from deep within, Echo crossed the finish line, inches ahead of the other horses. The sound of the crowd roaring in disbelief filled the air. Layla's hands were shaking as she gripped the reins, staring wide-eyed at the track ahead. They had done it. Echo had won. For a moment, everything stood still. Layla and Echo stood in the middle of the track, the world around them a blur of noise and motion. It wasn't just the victory that was overwhelming, it was the journey that had brought them here. From the moment she had laid eyes on him, weak and rejected, to this very moment, Echo had proven that strength wasn't always about size or speed. It was about heart. It was about the will to never give up, no matter the odds. As the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, proclaiming Echo's victory, Layla's heart swelled with a mix of pride and disbelief. She couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop the tears that threatened to fall. This wasn't just her victory. It was theirs. The jockeys on the other horses pulled up alongside her, congratulating her and offering words of admiration. They had all seen it, the way Echo had fought through the pain, the way he had given everything to win. But it was more than that. They had seen the bond between Layla and Echo, the unwavering trust they had in each other. It was something rare, something special. Derek, who had watched from the sidelines, walked up to Layla with a slow smile. "I'll be damned," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't think he had it in him. But you did something incredible." Layla could barely contain her joy. She hugged Echo's neck tightly, her voice barely a whisper. "We did it, Echo. We did it together." But the victory wasn't just about the race. It wasn't about the trophy, or the recognition, or even the applause. It was about the journey. It was about the girl who had seen something in a rejected horse, something no one else had. It was about Echo, the horse who had learned to trust again, to believe in himself and in his future. As the sun set over the track, Layla knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more races, more challenges, and more obstacles ahead. But no matter what came next, she knew that they had already won. They had won because they had never given up. They had won because they had never stopped believing. And that was a victory that would last forever.